I'm going to start with you, Pascal. So Pascal is from Zalando, and I know you're particularly interested in talking about compliance kind of across the chain, from consumers through to suppliers, and how you can use it as a vehicle for change. So perhaps you could just share kind of your initial thoughts and see where else you want to go. And for everyone else, do questions on Slido. We won't do them until about 30 minutes in, but we will also do roving mics at that point as well. So go for it.
All right. Thanks, Hannah, for setting the scene. I'm Pascal. I'm Vice President for Sustainability, Diversity and Inclusion for Zalando. So Zalando is a fashion retailer online for multi-brand products. So based in Europe and located in Berlin. So I've been living in Berlin for the last 1.5 years. Reflecting on what you said as well, I mean, on setting us the scene, I would like to bring us back also back in time. It's the 10th Sustainability Week of The Economist. If for the one that were there at that time, I guess you remember conversation about we need more regulation. That was all over. Every sustainability folks that are in the room will remember those times where we were pushing for more. We were like, hey, regulators, you need to shape up. We need a regulated industry. We need regulation around sustainability, and we need to level the playing field. Well, guess what? Now we are there. We are there, and we have people complaining. We have people complaining about, well, it's too much. It's a lot. It's challenging. It's not as we all hope for. And yes, there are part of that is true. It's challenging, but it's the first year as well that, for example, companies of a certain size are reporting on CSRD, and then CSRD will be more implemented across. And I think complaining already on the first year doesn't bring us forward. So I would like to really look at it from a positive angle. We have been willing for that. Now it's there. So what are we doing with it? How we make it better? How we engage with regulators? How we talk to regulators about how things can be better for your sectors or for the fashion industry that I'm part of and somehow representing through the partners that we sell on our platform. So they are really open for that dialogue. I spend a lot of time nowadays in Brussels as well to talk about upcoming regulation, what should be improved, what we should move for. Does that solve the challenges? No, I think there are still challenges across the different markets. For example, in Europe, we are present in 25 markets. Well, there is lack of harmonization, and that we all know that. So I think it's some things that we are always working on, how we create more harmonization across markets, how we ensure level playing field that every players that enter Europe as a market are following the same rules and the same set of rules, how we secure as well that we don't have policies across that impact and make each and every one of us less efficient at the end of the day. Reporting on one regulation in one country, another regulation in another one, just increase cost. It increases cost and inefficiencies. Does that tell us we need to stop? No, we need to work actually with regulators and make it better. And that's the position that we have taken at Zalando. It's really about how we make it happen, how we embrace CSRD. I mean, I kind of love CSRD. Maybe some people will find I'm coming from another planet, but I kind of like CSRD. The way it has been built and the way it has been thought through is super smart and it's super clever. I've been in this industry for many years. I've been in sustainability for many as well. And I think the way it has been thought through of keeping one standard, holding everyone accountable through transparent reporting, well, this is close to what I will call driving progress. So let's embrace it and let's make sure that we all together try to solve the challenge.
Great, thank you, Pascal. Nicolette, maybe coming to you and kind of the CDP perspective, kind of what you're seeing across a whole horizon of different organisations. And I know you have quite strong views on the importance of streamlining across standards as well. So do you want to jump in, pick up from there?
Sure, I think, is there a lot of regulation coming in, Pascal? I agree with you, there is. And I agree with you that we all agreed as a community that that's what is needed, right? So is all regulation going to be perfect at first? Definitely not, right? I mean, anyone who's engaged with CDP for the last however many years knows that we get it wrong as well, right? A lot. And so a regulator is going to do the same thing, right? But what's really interesting, I think, even if you just take Europe, the vast majority of the global market cap in Europe is pretty much already there in terms of just because you've been disclosing in CDP system for this long, right? So the interesting thing for me is that shouldn't be a car crash for most companies. Now, there are aspects where I can see a world that European companies are going to have a fragmentation in different markets. And I think, Pascal, that's the key. I think it's absolutely about working with the regulators to make it better, but also highlighting the fact that, there's everyone's favorite word these days in our very small, nerdy space is interoperability. Yeah. Great. Yeah. Interoperability is another way of saying, I mean, I'm going to be really, I'm simplifying, I'm oversimplifying here, but it's another way of saying it's not quite aligned, but if you you can make these things match. Like, that's how I see it being used. It shouldn't be used that way. So ultimately, we should ask for alignment and give interoperability as a plan B or C to the regulators, because I think alignment is critical, because ultimately we shouldn't be focusing on the data for compliance or the data to make a decision in a supply chain or the data to make a decision for a capital allocation decision. They should be the same data points across the board. That's the most efficient way of doing it. Then we know that we are getting density of data and that we are able to drive the decisions. You mentioned bringing everyone into the same space, so having a level playing field. That's one clear way of creating a level playing field, is that we don't diverge and that we actually focus on the data points that drive decision making, which means that regulators will need to review and assess and change the regulation over time. And it also places the onus on the standards bodies to really focus on that. Number one, align as much as you can. Number two, focus and make sure the market is telling you which of these data points drive decisions and which don't. Yeah. Right? And we can go into the data that's needed for supply chain, but I think that we can unpack that in the next part of the discussion.
Great. Thank you so much. Julia, coming to you now from the Competition and Markets Authority perspective, and I know one of your areas of interest is sort of pre-competitive collaborations and how that can accelerate action, and how can organisations do that sort of safely within the boundaries of the law? Because there might be some in the room who know that they have shared challenges but don't really know how to collaborate.
Thank you. Yes, and I'm really interested by what you opened with in terms of 2 points, one of which is working with regulators, because that's very much what I'm going to talk about, is how we try to work with the business community to overcome some of the challenges that they have when it comes to sustainability, and particularly around collaboration, but also about leveling the playing field. So my name's Juliet Answer. I'm the Executive Director for Competition Enforcement at the Competition and Markets Authority, albeit I'm not here primarily to talk about enforcement. I'm talking here about not enforcing. Before I get on to not enforcing competition law, I wanted to talk briefly about another of our responsibilities, which is for consumer protection. So as an authority, the Competition and Markets Authority is responsible in the UK for enforcing competition law, but also enforcing consumer protection law. And in that context, we've done quite a lot of thinking about how companies can make claims about their sustainable credentials and do so in a way that complies with the law, and in particular that doesn't mislead consumers. And I wanted to refer to that because I think that's quite an important part of leveling the playing field, and also quite relevant when we're talking about disclosure obligations, because obviously to the extent that there's kind of unified regulation, that means that it should give companies, I guess, comfort in making claims about their products, those claims will be based on verifiable information, and therefore there should be a level playing field, which should allow then consumers to make choice about buying sustainable products and then help drive sort of market-driven solutions, if you like, towards sustainable goals. So that's our consumer protection responsibilities. But primarily what I wanted to talk about was our competition enforcement and what we've done in that space. Now, competition law, as I'm sure you know, is there to preserve markets, to preserve healthy markets by regulating when competitors can work together. And that means that we have certain enforcement responsibilities as the CMA, and where companies work together in a way that seriously harms competition, where they set prices, where they particularly relevant for supply chains in some instances, where they engage in bid rigging, then we are very concerned and we want to take action. That can even be the case where companies agree between them what we might call a green cartel, where they agree not to compete in relation to key parameters of sustainability, I guess. Equally, however, we recognize that most companies want to do the right thing, and what they want to do is collaborate lawfully, and that kind of collaboration is frequently needed to solve some of the shared problems that businesses face in terms of transitioning to a more sustainable economy. And for that reason, we've tried to make it really help businesses comply with competition law by publishing guidance which gets really into some of the more detailed questions about how companies might work together, whether that's standard setting, whether that's pooling information about supplier credentials, whether that's pooling information about customer credentials, whether that's setting industry-wide targets. And we've tried to demystify in our guidance when these kind of collaborations can happen lawfully. And frankly, in a lot of cases they can. And this is what we've really tried to make clear. But we've also recognized that, we publish this guidance. We hope in doing so to demystify a lot of the rules, but that our guidance doesn't cover everything. So we also have what we call an open door policy, where groups of suppliers who are thinking of collaborating but are worried that their arrangements might fall foul of the law can come forward and ask us for our advice. Yeah. And interestingly, a lot of the advice that we're giving has been about collaborations intended to, for example, to improve sustainability in the supply chain. Mm-hmm. So I thought it was particularly relevant in this in this context.
Great. And I think I'll come to Lazar in a sec, but where we'll go next is maybe dive into actual examples of each, because we sort of talked about some of the principles. So if you can start thinking about examples as well. But Lazar, from EcoVadis, I know one of the things you're passionate about is kind of the digitization of data so that it becomes insights, and then those insights can actually be used then as sort of strategic value. And maybe you could start from there.
Sure. Yeah, I'll come to that in a sec if you don't mind. I just want to build up a little bit on what was said. Pascal, you're absolutely right. We noticed the same trend about a decade ago. Organizations starting to look into the space, wanting more regulation. Eventually, regulation coming about. And now they're saying, "Well, loosen it up a little bit, if you don't mind, because it's a bit too difficult." We got one. We got the CSRD, CSDDD, EUDR, the Public Procurement Act, whether it's in the UK, in South Africa, modern slavery is everywhere. And everywhere in terms of regulation. And now it's about almost consolidating some of that, or figuring out indeed the commonality in there, and then acting upon that. About 5-6 years ago, we published a study around the value of sustainable procurement. What is it that you can do as you make decisions about who you work with in terms of the third parties that is, can create a more resilient supply chain? And a lot that came out of that was, again, around regulation. And a lot of that came out was indeed now in law. So it's important to think about this because regulation will get you somewhere. It is going to get some of the organizations that aren't thinking about this, that aren't taking it seriously to a level where actually they're going to be able to make some decisions on that. And where digitization comes in is indeed making it more simple, making it more collaborative wherever possible, so that you can use indeed the same data points, indeed the same type of information across different industries, and sort of measure everyone to the same standards. Using regulation as a way to boost things, of course, but then taking it a step further so that you're not just complying with regulation, but really thinking about this a little bit more long term. Because yes, we may be loosening up certain things right now with the omnibus, but you never know what's going to happen in 12 months, 24 months. They may come back, certain administration in certain parts of the world will go. And then we'll come back to the tougher regulations, and you should be ready for that. So whatever work we say nowadays to a lot of our clients, whatever work you've done on CSRD, double materiality assessment, please don't let that go away. Build on that, and ideally use indeed a digital platform to make it easy for your suppliers, to make it easy for third parties to act together upon this.
And maybe starting with you, Lazar, if you could sort of talk about where you've seen that data become insights, that those insights then have become valuable for decision making.
Yeah. So I want to be as unbiased as possible here, because many of you are aware of what we do as an organization. So in order for the data to drive the right type of action, the data needs to be reliable. And what we've seen sort of 10 years ago up until about 5 years ago, and some sectors still there and is omnipresent, is getting data through either your own sets of questions or what we call self-assessment questionnaires. When you're engaging any third party, asking them pretty much to assess themselves and tell you the truth about how great they are. And often they will say that we are indeed absolutely phenomenal. Didn't you know? 150 questions. You know what? Half of these don't apply. We're just going to say yes to that because we want to keep your business.
Yeah.
And ideally win some more business. And what does that do? It gets you to a stage where you have a good friendly relationship with a lot of those organizations. You kind of trust them, and then you over-trust them and end up being in the press for the wrong types of things because when they said yes to something, actually they should have said no and looked into it. So the most important thing in all of this is being able to trust what is coming back to you. Ideally finding a way to verify some of that information, to use potentially a third party to do that, or to ask the additional question where you have a little bit of doubt. As one of our CEOs, because we got two of them, one always says, one doubt, no doubt. So the important bit here is to be able to verify and the trust what's coming back. And if you start to do that, then you actually can have a well-informed discussion with, be it a supplier or a client or a customer of yours, around the topic of sustainability or anything else, to get them to a stage, if you're seeing risk, to get them to a stage where you start to de-risk that. Or if you're seeing opportunity, perhaps there's best practice in some of that, to learn from that. And so the only way to drive action first is to get as much information as possible, but get information that's actually reliable, and also create a safe environment where some of these organizations can actually tell you the truth. You know what? We may have modern slavery in some of our minds. We have been aware of that. We're trying to work with it, but honestly, we don't know where to start. Can you help us out? And that level of trust is only created if they think that it is safe for them to tell you that, and that you won't walk away the moment you see any type of risk.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's one of the risks with sort of almost compliance-based behaviour.
Correct.
Inbuilt into human nature is that we want to be compliant, so we will find the evidence to demonstrate compliance, but then that doesn't necessarily lead to progress.
It's true. So. We do have a lot of companies that come over and say, can you just help me tick that box? It's not really what we're about, but let's try and tick that box. But you know what you're missing? And do you know how risky it is just to tick that box? Mm-hmm. Not even short term. No, sorry, not even long term, but even short term. cost of
Nicola, I wonder if you want to build on that, because that feels like the kind of dialogue you're going to be having with the partners that you work with a lot. And I noticed you circled transparency on your notes paper. And so maybe sort of picking up on that piece about both trust and transparency. And then again, the sort of value of translating it into strategic decision making, whether for investments or for risk management.
Yeah. So I couldn't agree more about the verification piece, either asking more questions or having third party. And I wouldn't have that as all, I'd have that as and. And I think, we've been working on that latter piece more and more, and the former piece really leaning into now. How else could we have this verified? In what other data sources do we need? Can this be assured or not assured, et cetera, et cetera? And I think I would start with that, we've had third party, we've had academic studies done on companies that have been disclosing through CDP, right? So this is using their emissions data, which is that they only use the data that was verified by a third party. And within the first 2 years of them disclosing, they do reduce their emissions by 7 to 10% on average, right? So that then tells me, so this is them doing it pre-compliance.
Yeah.
So that then tells me there is a use case for this. There is value in doing this. So A, does it lead to action? Yes, right? Now, why would they do that? Why would they do the heavy lift pre-compliance to do this kind of work? And I think it's because it unlocks value for them, whether it be managing a risk or whether it be identifying an opportunity. And there's another interesting statistic I was reading today that in one of the pieces of analysis that was done on our European company data set, was it in between 2022 and 2023, the European companies, so overall, they reduced their emissions 3%, but they also increased their revenue 3% in that period. So that's quite interesting, right? It really speaks to the fact that there is value in this, and that's what drives some of it. So there's kind of, when folks say, well, it's very uncompetitive to look at to force this reporting, I also think it's potentially uncompetitive to not. Because you might not be able to unlock these opportunities, and you might not be able to manage. Well, you definitely won't be able to manage these risks. We are going to be driving into an iceberg. Coming back to your original point, starting this panel, we are going to drive into an iceberg, right? And these are just the incremental risks we're looking at. These are just the risks we can see in front of our faces right now, right? And they're still really vast in our system. They're trillions if we analyze all the companies that report risk to us. But they also analyze, speaking to your point about also giving a rosy picture sometimes, it's really interesting. There's always at least 3 to 4 times more opportunity reported in our system than risk.
Interesting.
So even if you removed some of that really from that, it's still a lot more opportunity that companies can identify. And those are the companies that have been doing the so-called burdensome work voluntarily for that long, right? So there is a driver there that I think that is really important. The other thing I noted was that companies, just coming back to the point of the supply chain, companies, so we did a piece of work on a few years worth of data within CDP, a sample of companies that have been working actively, consistently across their supply chain. And we noted that in total, they were reporting to us at least a $13 billion worth of savings from having engaged across their supply chain. And I found that really interesting as well. So it wasn't just that they now needed the data for themselves, whether their investors were coming to them for that data, and therefore they needed the data to do their scope 3, so therefore they go to their supply chain. But actually, that additional work, number one, gave huge savings, but also number two, we track that consistently against those front runners who are achieving what they said they were going to achieve. One of the big things that they all do consistently is engage across their supply chains. So there is something there that I think I'm so glad to start to see the focus on this coming into the Economist events and all that, because this is a real place where we focus so long on sustainable finance, and this piece on supply chain has been an unsung area of wins, and I think there's even more value in it to be looking at.
Yeah. That feels like a perfect point for you to perhaps pick up on, maybe bringing that to life or any sort of counters or builds on that with your experiences at Zalando.
Well, I think, we talked, in supply chain, we often talk about we can't do it alone. So we have to work with partners. We have to work with our suppliers, with everyone within the value chain. I have a good example of what data and the power of data and what it brings, what kind of action it brings together. I mean, we have launched a few years ago the Fashion Leap for Climate, which together with Quantis, About You, Yux, Net-a-Porter, and then we had just onboarded ASOS and Cascale. Colin was speaking right before here, to enable science-based target for brands that doesn't have access to it. So really onboarding brands to the process of setting their science-based target and getting approved as well. So going to that process is one thing, getting approved is something else. And just by getting the data, I mean, when we started this project, it was in 2021. For Zalando's business, only 23% of our business was covered with science-based target. Now, a few years down the line, we are at 70%. So we are actually moving forward and getting that data. We know exactly which brands we need to engage to get through that process. And we consider ourselves a bit as an enabler, together with our partners in that journey, in onboarding those brands to that journey, which is quite fantastic, because then you directly 1 + 1 = 3. I mean, you directly talk to someone, you get into a process, and then you get the reward of once their science-based target is approved. So I think it's definitely something that without data we can't do that. Without collaboration we can't do it. Yeah, that's a very good example of what's a successful project. When we all come together, we can do it.
Wondering if you want to.
Yeah, I was just thinking, as I say, the examples that we've had where we've given informal guidance to companies that want to collaborate, or collaboration initiatives, are very much in the space that you are talking about. So, and these are all we make public our informal guidance. So if people are interested in following this up, you can look on our website. But one of the initiatives we worked on was World Wildlife Fund initiative, where they were working with UK retailers to collectively create a framework for retailers to require their suppliers to adopt net science-based targets. And they were working on that collectively so that each retailer would end up with 80% of their suppliers adopting science-based targets. And obviously the ultimate goal of the initiative was for retailers to decarbonise their supply chains. We were able to provide informal advice, saying that we wouldn't take enforcement action in relation to that initiative. But it was quite an early stage, so we did ask them, the sponsors to and retailers to keep an eye on certain issues. But I was just struck by the fact that those kind of initiatives are clearly ones where you might need to think about how you collaborate as competitors, but ones where certainly we would hope that competition law wouldn't have an unnecessarily chilling effect.
And Juliet, where are the sort of main spaces where you're seeing people starting to collaborate?
Certainly, as I say, the ones where we've had, the ones where we encourage businesses or sponsors of initiatives to come forward are ones where our guidance doesn't clearly cover the space, where the issues are relatively novel. This is quite a new thing for us, so we're still seeing businesses come forward. We have had sufficient interest that we think this is a space that we should definitely be devoting our time on. I think, as I say, a lot of them have been to do, or the 3 published ones, or 2 published ones, another one coming, I think, have been really about supply chain and about initiatives. So companies downstream wanting to collaborate when it comes to sustainability within their supply chains, so competing companies. I think what we have heard is that some companies are, because we are an enforcement body, might feel hesitant about coming forward. But I suppose for us, the purpose of us having adopted this guidance and this open door policy is because of the importance we place on not chilling business behaviour, which is ultimately beneficial. So that's somewhere where we're very keen to make clear that this isn't a way of us sort of trying to get our hands on things that we really don't like. Yeah. It really is to try and remove any regulatory barriers that there might, or perceptions, if you like, of regulatory barriers.
We're going to move into questions, so feel free to use the QR code and go to Slido and submit, and then we'll also have a mic if we need it as well. But whilst people are thinking about questions that they want to add in, I wondered if any of you just sort of had reactions to one another, a kind of a yes and that you wanted to jump in on anything that the fellow panelists said.
Just one thing on what Juliette was saying. I mean, having regulation on how we communicate to customers is key as well. I mean, this creates trust as well. The trust that probably a few years ago, a lot of brands were lacking. And now we see that with those regulations in place, well, we are enabling customers to trust the brands that they buy, that they shop for, or the product that they shop as well. So I think it's key. I mean, in our business, getting your customers' trust is key, and that's definitely an enabler. And that's thanks to the work that companies like CMA are working on and make that happen. So,
yeah, great.
What I was going to add was also on the sector collaboration front. I think if we're going to achieve something, often it is much easier to do it as a sector. Sustainability shouldn't really be an area where you want to compete too much. It should be for everybody's benefit. And we have quite a few examples in EcoVadis of creating technically sector initiatives, getting a few companies together that either share a common goal. They may be in the same sector or industry, but they share common goals in the supply chain, decarbonization, reducing risk of modern slavery, what have you. And individually, they lack the clout. They can't do it by themselves. However, collaborating with a few of their peers gets a tough, bigger supplier to see it as something now mandatory, not coming from just one, and not coming from the one where they don't spend too much money with, but coming from 3 or 4. Getting them over the edge to report more, to share more, to even start doing certain things. And we've done that successfully in traditionally what some organizations may deem as dirtier sectors, and in sectors that have been more sustainable over time. But it really does help when it's not just one voice being heard, that it is quite a few. And sometimes you get some of the most stubborn organizations that never want to report or say anything because they are who they are. But when it's the whole sector saying it makes a massive difference.
Any other builds? But otherwise, we're getting some good questions.
I can build and deal with the great classic CDP question, which I don't blame anyone for asking. So I think we're just touching on this collaboration point, but also on the SMEs question that's coming up here. So I think for supply chains, yes, if you look at the big companies, their first, 80% of their procurement spend is going to be other big companies, right? So for a long time, CDP and others were not focused on the next, and the next, and the next, and the next, which obviously brings you into the world of SMEs quite quickly. We are now. I know EcoVadis has been doing work on this space for so long, and really good work in that space, and really focused on how to unlock this right across the supply chain. Because if you don't get down to the SME level, if you don't get down to tier, right down to the bottom of the supply chain, you won't ultimately get that traceability you need. You won't ultimately unlock the savings. Plus, that is the part of the economy that actually drives every single economy, not just emerging economies, but, right across Europe, the US, the UK. What strikes me in that, bringing that collaboration piece together, is that what we've seen as very valuable is starting to unlock the overlap between the access to capital use case and the supply chain business resilience use case. In other words, bringing the banks into this, right? So traditionally, CDP started very much with the institutional investor case in point, shareholder, et cetera. So while we were working with the banks, we were working with a different part of the bank. The bit that we are now starting to unlock the value of with partners on is the kind of credit line. Now, that's a huge, access to capital is a big issue for most SMEs, right? So linking their ability to work, and given that that's where the regulators will probably pull back from, regulating for quite some time. We need to create a world where they're actually able to unlock some of this value, and that companies with their supply chains can reach their SMEs, have the data they need for decision making, but also enable those SMEs to go on this journey and make it less heavy for them, heavy burden to do. And I think banks have that. We've recently published a report with HSBC, and it's worth taking a look at, where we looked at the companies and we looked at how unlocking supply chain finance, any other cost of capital reductions for those SMEs can actually really bring them on the journey. And we noted also from that work that the suppliers are very clear. If they are financial incentive, 52% of them said that's financial incentives are the most important thing to unlock that action. So I just wanted to kind of bring that into it, that the collaboration is not just within sectors, but also with the banks who can reduce the cost of capital for this reduction. And then in terms of will CDP, get even more and more streamlined? Absolutely, right? What we should note, though, is that it depends on the use case of the company. So we're going to create a much more dynamic use case-based driven journey, right, from 2026 onwards. And it's going to come in incrementally. Companies are going to be able to tick the use cases that they have. And we, as we always have done, are going to try and make sure that those data points are similar in many places. And if companies are getting ready for compliance, as well as getting ready for their suppliers, there's quite a lot of work that's common. And it does mean that depending on the use cases they take, they are still going to have work to be done. But yes, the aim is to streamline as much as possible. Standing on a platform with a regulator and asking them to streamline means that CDP obviously needs to do the same thing.
I wonder if anyone else wants to jump in on this sort of slightly intersecting issue of sort of maturity of supply chain providers and size of them, which might be slightly linked, and sort of capacity that they have. And perhaps maybe Zalando, for examples from you, Pascal, might be interesting there.
Yeah, sure. I mean, for us suppliers, it's mostly our brand partners. So that's our next tier. So, but I mean, it's the same. I mean, there are different type of brands as well, and as there are different type of suppliers. So what we do, I mean, we do a mapping. I mean, not everyone are the Nike or the Adidas of the world. So some need more push than others, some need more guidance than others, and some need collaboration. So the top tier, we collaborate with them, and we work and try to find a clear case that we work together within our supply chain and their supply chain to progress on sustainability. The middle one is more guidance. So here we are more holding their hands and really getting together into, for example, reporting and enabling their DMA as well, the double materiality assessment, or their CSRD. And then for the last tier, then it's rather just a push and getting them to that journey. So I guess for everyone here, I mean, it's more how does the mapping look like in your value chain that will make the difference.
Great, thank you. There's a question for you specifically, Liza, which is how does EcoVadis tackle site-level assessments past the supplier's headquarters?
Sure. Could I just add to something?
Yeah, please do.
You're right, and I do like the question, the first one, and I'll do the EcoVadis one, because so part of our solution is around carbon management, and often we hear with organizations like, the likes of Zalando, who are engaging their suppliers on this topic, have difficulty. Because indeed, you go and you ask, everybody wants a fully certified carbon footprint of their supply chain. Ideally, that's what everybody's looking for. But then you start to talk to your suppliers and realize that less than probably 10% of them could even get something like that. Most of them you get an empty stare, and some of them actually don't even understand what do you mean by scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions? Carbon, okay, I'm starting to understand carbon. Did you know that I'm actually struggling to get an electricity bill? So where do you want me to start? And so the important thing there is first to acknowledge that, of course, but second, to start to ask just very simple questions and cover the basics with them. If they can't get you a carbon footprint, then stop pushing right now. You'll get it eventually. Start to talk to them about carbon management, what that means, what's the governance maybe they should have. Or if they're a really small company, well then, can they measure that electricity in any way, shape, or form? If they can't, can they at least engage the electricity provider to provide them something more accurate than just a guesstimate?
Yeah.
So it's really important just to not push it, as you rightly say, not push when you're not going to get anything, because it's not going to get you anywhere. You're just going to get somebody that's disengaged. On the topic around EcoVadis tackling site level assessments, we do that. So we're not an on-site auditor, but our assessments are based on evidence. We want to see evidence of any claim that any organization is making. And we do that by legal entity name. So as long as there is a legal entity attached to a site or a set of sites, we can assess those organizations. And more organizations are doing exactly that, because their customers are saying, you could use, one of the big four saying, well, I work with PwC, but I don't work with PwC UK. I work with PwC in the UAE. So no, thank you for the UK one. I'd like the local one. So it is important, because there are differences there, especially in terms of actions and reporting capabilities. The policies may be the same at the group as well as the site, but what happens on the site is very, very important. So that's how we deal with that. We look at legal entities, and if there isn't one per site, there's usually one by a couple of sites or 3 sites and so on.
Great, thank you. See the top question as one sort of a political one for you, Julia. So how is CMA helping here with growth? And do you see it as green being a growth enabler or a hindrance?
Okay, so it's quite a fundamental question here.
Yeah.
So I think if you think about competition, it can be a real driver of innovation. It can be a driver of productivity. Those are obviously very good things for growth. So as a competition enforcer, my day job is trying to remove obstacles to competition, anti-competitive, harmful, illegal activity, which has the potential to dampen competition, to dampen some of those drivers of growth, so in that sense, I guess a lot of what I do is aimed at driving growth. Obviously, how I go about that is also quite important. There are ways that we could do it that more or less, I guess, involve more or less of a burden on business, and that's also something that I'm paying attention to. And then turning back to sort of the specific discussion that we're having today. One of the ways that the competition law could potentially have a negative impact on growth is if we overchill beneficial behaviour, like beneficial collaborations, albeit that I'm not sure that I agree that sustainability should be a competition law free space. Obviously when it comes to businesses collaborating, there are a number of potentially competing goods here.
Well, for sure.
I think in that sense, the conversation we're having today is fully aligned with a perspective on growth.
Any adds or bills? I thought you reacting, so I wondered if there's anything.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. No, you're absolutely right. Yes, there is elements that, sustainability, the overall sort of paradigm, you shouldn't compete too much. Everybody should be doing more sustainable things, but in the right way. Yeah, absolutely.
And I guess that behind the question is sort of what growth is good growth as well, and that's a deeper sort of political economy question. I'd like to go to the cluster of data questions, but I'd also like to say if anyone has a question they'd like to speak out loud, it would be lovely to hear some other voices as well. So I can see someone at the front, and I think Emma and team, you have roving mics, so we'll bring one down. Just lovely to sort of have a bit more two-way. Yeah, the lady in the cream and black.
Thank you. My question is for Pascal, actually. You mentioned, your commitment to more climate positive processes and how you rely with your partners. I know Zalando, for example, has hundreds of brands. So when it comes to their commitment to sustainability, how easy is it to filter out the good guys or the good brands, the not so good, or let's say moderately good? And you mentioned the report with the UX and Net-a-Porter group and things, and I know these are both platforms that has a huge number of brands. So are sometimes brands being spotlighted without properly really looking at whether they're really sustainable brands or not? Because I may or may not have come across some, let's say, claims without mentioning names. So, I mean, sometimes it's, I didn't know how as a retail group you would look at that.
Very good question. Well, it's part of our due diligence. So, I mean, every brand that comes on our platform sign first a sustainability commitment. So that's something that we are empowering as well the brands to hold on their commitment. And then it's about the due diligence that we do. So every brand onboarded goes through a due diligence process. And in the past, we have rejected brands as well. So, I mean, we have filtered and really curated brands that are matching our ambition and our values. We signed, for example, I mean, we signed we just got approved our science-based target. I mean, well, ultimately we will need brands that are on that journey as well. I mean, we will not be stronger than the weakest link and the weakest brand on our platform. So we need to get there. Will we get there from one day to another? No. I think there are a lot of work to do with those brands that are already onboarded prior to that commitment that we had potentially, that we need now to somehow enable them to achieve their goals and their targets. But that's a journey that we are together with those brands. So yes, we have a lot of brands, but that's not impossible as long as we do a mapping that makes sense and a mapping that we have a thorough due diligence process, which we will be imposed by regulation at some point as well. I mean, CSRD now kind of start to be put into bed, but I hope it will come back because it's definitely the way forward in order to prevent wrong brands to be on our platform.
Great, thank you. Thanks for the question. I think there was one at the back. Yes, gentleman standing up over there. Thanks, Emma.
Hi there, Dexter Galvin, formerly of CDP. I wanted to say a huge thank you for the Competitions and Markets Authority for the clarity around that regulation, because it drives a huge amount of efficiency in sector initiatives when they're trying to engage their suppliers and help them take action. And critically, from an efficiency perspective, it helps customers coalesce around a few certain KPIs, so it doesn't push the market to report on absolutely everything. So that clarity was really helpful for all supply chain initiatives, actually. It was a bit of a game changer, so thank you. And a question to you, what was the catalyst for that? Because I remember thinking, this felt like it came out of nowhere, incredibly useful clarification, but didn't know where it came from.
Yeah. Juliette.
The Green Agreements guidance, it was, we heard from a lot of stakeholders that the beneficial sort of cross-sector collaboration was being, they thought, unnecessarily chilled because people didn't have or businesses, other stakeholders didn't have a good understanding of where the lines were. And we thought we could really move the dial on that, we hoped, by publishing relatively, how can I put it, relatively lay guidance on how the rules might work when it came to collaboration between competitors. So it's good to hear that we've achieved that goal.
Great. So we're about 3 minutes to the hour, so we can do data question, or you have a question. So who feels very strongly about data and they'd love to show of hands about data? Only one strong hand. Okay, I'm going to go with you. So then, yeah.
I had a question about this great UK initiative. Is that sort of being discussed to roll out to the European Union? Because again,
question for Juliet.
Sector collaboration is something we really want to do at a big scale. So, congrats for the UK as the front runner. But how can we get?
We are. I have to say, I don't think we're necessarily the front runner. I think it's possible that other European national authorities got there before us. But I know that it's something that is increasingly being adopted by competition authorities. And I want to say that the EU are, including, I believe, the European Commission, but I don't know offhand where they are in that process.
Right. Thank you. Okay, that leaves us with a moment or so on data. So there's two. There's one around reliable data at scale and one around sharing data to unlock value. So just really jump in, whoever goes. Nicola, I'm assuming you'd like to tackle one or both of these.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think there's one here around reliable data at scale, but I think the other part of it was quite interesting is how do we make sure that you're doing that but you're also avoiding gaming.
Yeah.
And of course that applies to a bunch of things, not just site visits. And I think that's potentially one of the biggest areas that the new digital kind of revolution provides us with the ability to do more and more, which is instead of the sort of clipboard method of verifying everything and human being auditing everything, you can actually start to verify using different data sets and geospatial data and asset level data and all those kind of things, so that you're actually reflecting and you're asking companies to respond to data that exists elsewhere, and you're building data on data that's actually meaningful. And I think that's really what the focus, coming back to your original point around verification being so important, I think that's one of the areas that the new digital tools really provide us with opportunities for, is to actually unlock some of those aspects of verification so that we can stop gaming, but in a very efficient way rather than a very resource intensive or human being intensive way.
Great. Anyone else want to add in on that dimension?
Well, I think, when it comes to data, I guess what the fashion industry has done great in the last few years is to align on one standard. Yeah. And that helps in reducing audit and the audit fatigue. And that helps in getting reliable data as well, if that data is verified and substantiated. But that's something that's through Pascal, that Colin was representing in the panel before. The fashion industry has managed to create a coalition behind it. Before we started that, I remember a supplier complaining that he got in 1 year above 700 auditing form to fill in. Where does he have time to do something else then? That's what we as an industry and across the board, needs to focus on. How we create one standard that we all move forward and create the data and get the data from that.
Yeah. Great, thank you. We are at 4:00, and I guess sort of the key themes that jumped out at me is this value of kind of transparency and trust, so that you can have those honest relationships. Shouldn't expect it to be perfect. It's not going to be. Kind of everyone's navigating this, but there's also sort of remembering this deeper why, but also that actually a lot of companies have been asking for regulation. We now have it. It's difficult to navigate, but also remembering the value of it to kind of raise that floor. So I think what we have up next is Pauline Potter from Every, who's going to be doing a case study, so bringing some dimensions to life around the growth question. So good thorny question, and just want to give a big round of applause to the panelists. Thank you.
Thank you.